In this series of videos, we are going to walk you through the installation of our new audio systems for the Polaris General side-by-side vehicle. So without further ado, let's head on inside and see how it's all done. Alright guys, I am now joined by Brad with our new product development team, and he's going to help walk us through the installation of our Stage 3 audio kit for the Polaris General side-by-side vehicle. So Brad, what all comes in the kit?
So in our kit, we include our PMX source unit, the dash kit and bracket, as well as our front lower pods and speakers, sub enclosure with woofer, and our amplifier and amplifier plate.
Alright, and what's the first thing we need to do to get started?
First thing we do is pull the hood and the top of the dash panel off.
Alright, well let's see how it's done. Alright, now that we have the hood removed, we're going to go ahead and remove the top of the dash. Now the dash itself is held in place with a number of plastic rivets that need to be removed. So to do that, we're going to use a special tool designed for removing those plastic rivets, but of course you may not have this in your toolbox. So a small flat blade screwdriver will also suffice. Just be careful because you don't want to scratch up or mar the plastic when using this. Alright guys, so now that we've got that done, we can go ahead and continue the disassembly process. So Brad, what's the next thing we need to take off?
The next thing we're going to do is remove all of our seats, dash panels, and center console panels as well. That way it gives us a clear path to install the necessary components.
Alright, and just as a side note, we're going to go ahead and take the doors off the vehicle just for video clarity purposes. Now understand, in your install, you're not going to need to do this. We just want to be able to give you guys the best view possible so you can kind of see what we're doing. Alright guys, so now that we have the vehicle completely disassembled, we're ready to go ahead and start prepping the components to go in. Now the first up is the subwoofer enclosure. So Brad, what do we need to get the sub enclosure ready to go in the vehicle?
So what we're going to do is load our woofer into the enclosure. Before we stick it in the box, we're going to need to wire it. Now we send it with a dual 2 ohm woofer, so we're going to wire this in series to get a 4 ohm load for our amplifier. Now we're using a 404 on this, so ideally 4 ohm is where you want to be when you bridge it. So we'll wire our 2 coils in series, basically by taking the positive from one side, the negative from the other, and using the include jumper. Now once you have that in series, you'll use the 2 remaining wires in the enclosure for the 2 leftover terminals, and then you'll be able to screw it in and get it all together.
All right guys, so now that we have the subwoofer installed into the enclosure, we're ready to move on to the next step. As a side note, you'll notice we did not install the grill that came with the subwoofer because it's not needed for this installation. So Brad, what's the next thing we need to do for this installation?
So the next thing we need to do is mount our two mounting brackets for the enclosure into the car itself. Now our smaller bracket will use an existing hole that is currently filled with a zip tie from the factory. What you're going to do is cut that, remove it, and then use the supplied hardware to mount the bracket to it. Now we did include a new zip tie that'll fit into the bracket so you can re-secure the factory harness. Now on a side note, when mounting your brackets to the vehicle, it's important to know what hardware to use. Now we included 2 thread cutting screws for the main plate. Now you can tell this by they have a rounded tip. For the smaller bracket, you have a short fastener with a nut that you'll use. The leftover short ones will be for the enclosure, and the 2 long machine screws will be for the enclosure front brackets.
Now that we have the plates installed in the vehicle, what's the next step?
The next thing we're going to do is take our subwoofer enclosure, slide it up into the dash, then mounting it securely with the included fasteners.
All right, so now that we have the subwoofer enclosure mounted to the plates, what's the next thing we need to do?
The next thing we can do is take our 4-channel amplifier and mount it to the amplifier mounting plate that we've already installed.
Alright guys, so now that we have the sub enclosure and amplifier mounted in the vehicle, ready to move on to the next step, which in this case, Brad, is what?
We're going to go ahead and install our front lower pods.
Okay, so the installation process, is there any special procedure, anything we need to make sure we do?
Well, with these, you will have to drill 3 holes.
Okay.
So we'll have to physically put these in and mark them. So the easy way to tell which one is which is the diamond R on the inside panel will always be in the proper orientation. Another way is you can always tell is the wire hole is up to the top. Now as you can see, we are curved on the back side, so it's simply just put the pod in against the outside of the vehicle, push it to the firewall, rotate up, and it will actually fall right into place. You will actually get a stopping point where the pod needs to be.
Okay, and once we've aligned it to the proper position, what's the next thing?
Next thing we'll do is we'll take our silver Sharpie marker, or if you have a pencil, that'll work as well. Mark our 3 holes we need to drill, pull the pod back out, then drill our holes.
Okay, and then once the holes are drilled, what's the next thing to prep the pod?
At that point, we'll be ready to install our harness into the pod, put the sealing tape on it, and then go ahead and mount the pod using the included fasteners.
And then once the pod is mounted on the sidewall, we are ready to go ahead and wire the speaker.
Yep, we can go ahead and wire the speaker and then run the wires up.
Okay. All right, at this point, we're ready to move on to the next step, which in this case is what, Brad?
We're gonna prep our PMX2 to go into the car.
Okay, and what do we need to do to get that done?
So we're gonna find our PMX2 adapter bracket and our main general dash kit. From there, we can just slide the two together, mount it with the 4 screws. Then we'll take our PMX source unit, mount that with 4 screws, and then we'll be ready to set it in the car.
Okay, and then once we have this prepped, we're ready to go back to the vehicle, install the center console side trim panel, as well as the dash assembly, and move on from there. Alright guys, so before we reinstall the dash assembly, we're going to go ahead and install our PMX2 radio and dash kit to make it a little bit easier in the end when we go to do the final assembly. So Brad, to be able to put the radio in, I know our dash kit's a 2-piece system, so what's the first thing that we actually need to put in to mount the radio?
So what we're going to do is take our included bracket and mount it on the back side of where the factory pocket was. There's actually 4 bosses already there, and we've included 4 screws to go ahead and fasten that down. Now we're going to leave it a little loose, so when we put the radio in, everything has the ability to line up.
Okay, so once the back plate is in position, then we're going to take the radio, and how does that mount into the system?
So that's just going to slide through the front, and then there's 4 more screw spots that'll sandwich it within the dash panel.
Okay. Alright guys, so now that we have the dash reassembled, we're ready to move on to the next step, and that would be what?
Running our power wire for our amplifier from the battery to the front of the vehicle.
Okay, is there anything that makes it easier or anything they need to know whenever they're doing it?
So in the box, you will have the complete harness for power, ground, as well as signal. Now what we recommend is going ahead and remove the remote wire out of the power connector and set that section aside. That way you don't have to worry about all the extra wiring moving forward in the vehicle.
Okay. And then as far as this is a pretty big connector, I know the grommet space on the vehicle is not always that.
It's tight. It does fit. If you feel more comfortable, remove it, tape it up. It's your choice.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and see how it goes in. Okay, so now that we have the power harness ran up into the dash area, we're ready to continue with the rest of the electrical connections. First thing you're going to do is you're going to reconnect the remote turn-on wire that you removed from the power plug earlier to make it easier to run the wire through the vehicle. Once that's done, you will connect the front output plug to the front output of the amplifier. Then locating the front and rear input plugs, you'll connect those to the front and rear input of the amplifier. The RCA plugs will connect to the front and rear RCA output directly off the PMX2 radio. And then you will locate the front, left, and right speaker plugs, and these will connect to the lower speaker pod cables that we ran earlier. Lastly is the remote turn-on wire plug that will then connect to the remote turn-on wire found in the PMX2 harness. Now, Brad, what other connections on the PMX2 harness do we need to make?
So we'll have to make a few more connections, one being the switched power for the PMX2, which is on this cable right here. You'll run it through the factory grommets out under the hood to the factory distribution block. Our ground we made into a T-harness that you'll run down to your cigarette lighter and grab the negative off of there, insert it into the male side, and then you can use our female terminal to go back onto the cigarette lighter. Once that's done, we'll be able to do the main connection to the PMX2.
And then once we have all these connections made, we'll be able to then go back to the battery, connect the power cable and the ground cable at the battery, and then we should be ready to fire the system up and test it and tune it. Alright guys, so now that we made all the final electrical connections, we fired the system up just to make sure everything appears to be working properly, we're ready to go ahead and do the final setup on the amplifier. Now, before we actually dial any of the outputs in and set the radio, we want to set up the switches so they're in the proper position and adjust the crossovers. Now, first thing you'll want to do is you'll find the 2-channel, 4-channel switch on the amplifier. You'll want to make sure that switch is in the 4-channel position since we're using both front and rear RCA inputs. Next to that, you're going to notice the 2 crossover switches labeled HP, AP, and LP. The front channel switch you're going to want to make sure is in the HP position because they're full range speakers. The rear channels you want in LP because that's what's driving the subwoofer for the low frequencies. The crossover adjustment dial setting the frequency, both of these you'll want to adjust to approximately 80 Hertz. Once those adjustments are made, we're ready to move on to the others. Now you'll notice above the crossovers, the EQ adjustment dials. Now because this is an open air vehicle and we're not going to really gain any benefit from it, we are going to keep the punch EQ controls turned all the way down. Next, we're ready to set up the gain controls, or the output level controls of the amplifier. First thing you want to do is find out at what level does the radio clip. This is indicated on the amplifier by the input clip indicator light. To do this, you can either utilize the test tones that we provide with the amplifier, or you can also use music. typically stream from a Bluetooth device. In this instance, we're going to utilize music for our application. So you'll start by turning the volume of the radio up, watching the input clip indicator on the amplifier. Once you achieve a volume where the input clip indicator turns red, you'll slowly back the volume down one notch at a time until the light goes out. This is the proper level for setting the amplifier because we are now delivering a fully unclipped signal into it. Once there, you start adjusting the front output level control up until you see the output clip indicator begin to flash blue or even blue-purple depending on the type of music you're using. Next, you'll repeat the same step for the rear output, adjusting its output until you see again the blue or blue-red indicator. Once you've done that, the amplifier is set up and you're ready to move on to the next step. Alright, so that pretty much does it for the amp setup. At this point, ready to move on to the next step, which in this case is
final assembly. We're going to go ahead and zip tie all our wires up to make sure they don't catch anything in motion. Then we can go ahead and assemble all the panels.
Alright, well let's get to it and get this thing back out on the road. Alright guys, that pretty much wraps it up for this install. So as you can see, it was pretty easy and straightforward to do. So Brad, is there anything you'd like to add before we cut out of here?
Well, as always, if you have any questions before, during, or after the install, give us a call. We'll be more than happy to help you out.
And as always, make sure you check out our website for more information on all the products we manufacture. And of course, check out the YouTube channel for more installation videos. Well, that wraps it up for us on this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in another video.